Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Chitheads. My guest today is Susanna Harwood Rubin. Susanna is the author of Yoga 365, Daily Wisdom for Life on and Off the Mat. She is a yoga teacher, writer, and artist whose work is rooted in South Indian philosophy. Based in New York City, Susanna teaches internationally and speaks on yoga, meditation, and Hindu myth. Her spiritual home is in Chidambaram at the great Nataraja and Talai Kali temples. She teaches Devi Soul Yoga, combining yoga asana with mantra, myth, and mudra, and is the creator of 30 Things and Writing Your Practice workshops and online courses that apply yoga philosophy and myth to the practice of writing. Susanna writes for numerous publications and has been featured on Huffington Post Live, MSNBC Today, She Summit, Yoga Journal, Mantra Wellness, and more. And Susanna is with me here today at my home in Brooklyn, New York. So hello, Susanna. Thanks so much for joining me.
Hello, Jacob. Thank you for inviting me.
So it's a real pleasure to get an opportunity to talk to you today. I know we swim in similar circles in New York. We're both tantrikas. We study with teachers who have worked alongside each other at various points in their life. So it's a beautiful opportunity to get to have a conversation with you today about so many things that we're both passionate about. But before we get into all of that, I would love to hear a little bit about your own story and what has led you to your own practice that you have today.
It's such an interesting one. It's like I'm always trying to encapsulate this long story into a short
Right.
little blurb.
The abridged version.
Yes, the abridged version. I'll do my best. I moved to New York as an artist, so in the art world as a very young adult.
Before 9/11, right?
Oh yeah, well, right, yeah, before in the 90s, and I was thoroughly embedded in the art world, lecturing and writing for MoMA, and working as an artist and showing quite extensively, actually, and exhibiting work in New York and internationally. And I was very stressed out, so I found yoga at the gym, finally. I had done yoga years earlier, and I'd practiced very seriously, actually, in high school and helped to teach it. Although back then it was like, oh, do a headstand, now lie down, now relax, now breathe. You know, it wasn't what it is today. And I found my way back to it because I was so stressed out from the art world. And I had a real love-hate thing with the art world because I had always considered myself an artist. I'd always written too, but I'd always considered myself an artist. And
First and foremost.
There was like, that was who I was. That was my identity, period.
Yeah.
And I found myself increasingly disliking the New York art world. I love New York, but the art world was just, I felt like it wasn't really that much different than being on Wall Street. It was
like a superficiality to it,
yeah,
or
superficiality. I felt like I had to spend most of my time doing self-promotion and not so much time getting my work done. And so this whole idea of who I was it was misaligned in a way.
Yeah.
Like my actions and who I wanted to be and what I had to do to get to where I thought I wanted to be were not in sync. And it wasn't until and so I was really struggling with all these things. And it wasn't until 9/11 that I actually ended up doing a yoga teacher training, and it just clarified a lot for me, temporarily. I got confused again later, but I realized that I wanted to spend less time schmoozing at art openings and less time alone in a room and more time in community and connecting with people.
Yeah.
And that really changed things for me, and I never had the tiniest intention of being a yoga teacher, even though I had taught in high school. It was just kind of a fun thing I did with my teacher. And I emerged thinking, do I want to teach yoga? And I struggled with my identity surrounding that for a long time. I had a hidden yoga site inside my art website, which was for years. Because the yogis were like,
password protected.
Yeah. The yogis were like, oh, it's so cool that you make artwork, And the artists were like, oh, you're not serious about art? You're doing something else other than making art. So, and now the art world doesn't care so much anymore, but my relationship to it is so different. So I was still at MoMA for many years and actually just stopped lecturing there a few years ago. I was on staff part-time for 9 years, but then I went back to being a freelance lecturer there. I started as one and then ended as one. So I left on good terms, but ultimately I just was like, I had to make decisions about where my focus would be. So I still make artwork, but it's more in the service of my spiritual practices, and I regained that love and of exploring through like a pen moving on paper or a pencil scratching across a surface, that I had, like a deep love of drawing that I had years ago that I had really lost. And yoga really brought that back for me.
That's beautiful. So I want to ask you a little bit about the kind of 9/11 transition, because I feel like this is something that people who live in New York in the yoga community know about, that is, at least to some degree, kind of an untold story, which is the story of yoga's evolution in New York City, where, 9/11 happened and yoga exploded as a sort of, as a kind of, it was necessary. There was, it was almost like it just was completely instinctive that, of course, this practice would take root here. And so the success and the popularity of yoga in New York today really is connected to that history. So can you paint a little picture of that, at least in terms of your own story and what that was like to feel that pull towards a spiritual practice?
Yeah, well, I mean, I live within a mile of the World Trade Center, so I watched it from Washington Square Park, and there was a before and there was an after, and then my neighborhood for the next month you could almost not breathe. That area around NYU and Washington Square Park, it was really, the air was so thick and heavy that I would step inside my apartment, immediately take off all my clothing, wrap them up in a plastic bag, block the door, and step into the shower and have to wash everything head to toe, because the stench, the chemical stench, the stench of bodies, the stench of everything was just coating my skin and hair.
Wow.
And so that was, and I'm one of thousands and thousands and thousands of people who experienced that. But I don't even think I know that caused a huge boom in the yoga world. Because I was doing it then. I can remember going to see like Krishna Das at Jivamukti next door to Crunch, and it was sort of like, there are like 15 people in a room chanting with this guy. This is sort of like, something is interesting happening. Mm-hmm. Something interesting is happening to me. My skin's kind of vibrating. But I didn't really know what it was. And I was fine, just kind of visiting that now and then it became more of a necessity to me afterwards, and like that there were these ways that we could work things out of our body and connect the mind and the body, and the thing that had gone missing for me in the art world, suddenly I was finding in this other world. As art was always very mind-body to me, and just like the physicality of making a drawing or working on sculpture and being immersed, like body, heart, mind in every way. And then I kind of lost that and all the anxiety about like making your way in the art world and climbing and this and that, and I just didn't like it. So all of a sudden, boom, here it was in a different context. And then it exploded. I really do believe that the huge yoga explosion that happened was a direct result of 9/11, because I just watched it happen. All of a sudden, there's a teacher training everywhere.
Yeah.
And everyone was like, that's it. I'm not going to be a lawyer. I'm going to be a yoga teacher. I'm not going to be, and we were all kind of like, yeah, you might not want to do that. Those of us who were already artists, we were like, you might not want to give up your day job. But it was really a huge shift. And then yoga became normal-ish sometime around 2005, 2010.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So when did because obviously you're known for being very connected to the esoteric teachings, and obviously particularly the teachings of Shaivism. So when did that kind of come into the picture? When did yoga for you become more than simply a physical practice? Like, when did you discover the philosophical teachings, and when did they start to take hold on you?
First weekend of my teacher training.
Really?
Well,
Okay.
the first weekend of my teacher training, Douglas Brooks was
Oh,
there.
he was there. Mm-hmm.
And that was, I would not have become a yoga teacher if he had not been involved in my teacher training.
Amazing.
I might have just dabbled. I might have been like, oh, I'll teach my friends or whatever. But this guy shows up and he's brilliant and he's talking about these concepts that like and my background is super academic, and I was doing very academic stuff at MoMA. Mm-hmm. The writing and the this and the study and the research. And so all of a sudden, here it was in the yoga world, and I was like, you mean I can have it all? It was kind of incredible. That was it. Like,
Yeah.
It kind of blew my mind, and there was no looking back for me. And I do, and he knows this too. I say I would never become a yoga teacher if it weren't for studying with you. So it's been 17 years now.
And for you, it was the kind of rigor of what he was explaining about the tradition, or what was it exactly?
It was the rigor, it was the clarity, it was the fact that you didn't have to do this, like, check your brain at the door
Right.
kind of thing.
Or this wishy-washy, new agey sort of like just feel
Exactly.
good, or just
Yeah.
like be positive.
Like, you could always give the because.
Yeah.
If you said, well, why? He would say, because this, 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 this.
Yeah.
Oh, and that's from the Upanishads, and this is from the Vedas, and this is from the this, and this is from, the Shiva Sutras. And you were like, oh, well, okay then. Next question.
Yeah.
And so for me, coming from an academic background, that helped me step into it. Like, I do have that part of me that needs to be like, well, okay, I used to have to research all these artists, and I would have to find 10 sources to make a statement.
Yeah.
So that for me I found it very reassuring. And I'm not very rainbows and unicorns, so
Me
and he
neither.
is not, and so that was very helpful to me. And I like the fact that someone could speak about spirituality in a way that wasn't rainbows and unicorns, in the way that was rooted in sort of an intelligent, experiential way. I don't know how to put it more other than that. And also, it's funny when you meet someone and everything that comes out of their mouth is like, well, yeah, that's what I think. And it was that experience, just in terms of a worldview.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, could I give you an example? Like,
Please.
One of the sort of most basic things that resonated with me early on was this conversation between Karma and Lila. So karma, of course, cause and effect.
Yeah.
That's the most simple explanation. And Lila, which is chance, serendipity, the thing that happens, which can be the best thing on earth or the worst thing on earth. You don't know what it is. But the concept in the tradition that,
Often
I've
translated as
studied.
play, right?
Yeah, cosmic play could be like Radha Krishna, it can be like the divine play. It means so many things.
Right.
But the idea is that you have Karma and Lila interacting in this way that they're sort of like zooming in and out of each other. And so you can do all these things and line everything up and have your ducks in a row and do the karmic thing in your life. But you don't know, like, when something's going to slam you out of the blue that you didn't expect, and that's the Lila. Or when this unbelievable opportunity presents itself, and that's the Lila. So the idea is that cause and effect and absolute chance and circumstance are interacting. And this is, as you know, not like the main belief in the yoga, most of the yoga traditions. It's, he studied a Sri Vidya tradition in Madurai with his teacher, off and on for like 17 years, which is kind of funny. And
So this is incredible. So what I hear you
Yeah.
saying is essentially this is a solution to the kind of critique of karma that it is deterministic,
Yes.
right? And that there's no escape from it. And what
Yes.
you're saying is actually that these two are kind of a couple, Karma and Lila, and considered together, we can hold in the same experience both this cause and effect structure and also while still preserving the possibility of chance or randomness or
Yeah.
the chaos of life.
Yeah, that yeah, exactly. Because I always had a problem with people who would be like, well, everything happens for a reason. Even when I was young,
Yeah.
I was like, what do you mean everything happens for a reason? Like, and I'd be like, what about the Holocaust? What about Rwandan genocide?
Exactly.
What about the former
Yeah.
Yugoslavia? Like, all
Yeah.
the terrible things human beings do, the Inquisition, like, whatever it is, how can you say everything happens for a reason? I mean, there are reasons that cause things to happen.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about destiny,
Yeah.
like, I'm out.
Yeah,
I'm
this
out
is
of that
exactly what
conversation.
this is. So for me, my first, I was in grad school for philosophy here in New York when I did my yoga teacher training, and I won't name names, but the yoga teacher training, it was based in a sort of a certain teacher's form of Tibetan Buddhism. And essentially they were really hooked on this idea of emptiness, but it was emptiness without the accompanying idea of dependent origination, which of course you can't understand the idea of something being empty without the accompanying idea that everything is connected, which is essentially dependent origination. And so basically, this everything is empty, but then also this idea of karma was being introduced. And when I did ask a question about the Holocaust, because of course then that implies that, that those people who
That was
went
their
through
destiny.
yeah, it was their destiny,
Come
or
on.
like they were somehow karmically responsible.
Crazy.
Then the answer was always like, well, karma's mysterious, which is just in other words, like, you don't need to understand it, just accept that it's mysterious. And like I was like, I don't buy this,
Yeah.
not at all. So this is really a wonderful teaching that you're offering.
Thank you. And no one listening just saw me roll my eyes at that.
Yes,
so.
yes. Susanna rolled her eyes. We rolled our eyes collectively together.
We did.
Okay, so how did you then? Well, actually, I want to ask you a question about New York, because you and I were having lunch with some mutual friends the other day, and talking about living in New York. And I know you also lived in Paris. That's a part of your kind of formation as an artist. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts about the relationship between New York and spirituality, because obviously we're saying historically yoga kind of emerged here. Most people think of New York as a place of ambition and commerce, but there's also this incredibly like thriving spiritual scene in this city. And do you have any, thoughts on why that is, and why New York also attracts, besides incredibly ambitious people, also people who are deeply spiritual?
That's such an interesting question. I mean, I think about it. I think about it all the time, actually. I think part of it's out of necessity. I think people, sort of like my story, like you get to a point where you're like, is that all there is?
Yeah.
And I think it tumbles into, I think for many, not all, but many people, that ambition and that drive tumbles into is this all it's ever going to be? At a certain point, once you've achieved certain things, and you're like, I mean, for me, I'm like, here I am with a highly coveted, position at MoMA. Not that I was anything fancy, but I got to do really cool projects and write on Picasso and Matisse and do all this neat stuff, and lecture on all these, artists. And I'm like, I know this is highly coveted, but now what?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was a lot of creative satisfaction for me in that as well. And I think, while you earn all this money, and you're like, now what? And I think the next piece is, even in like the Indian tradition, the next piece is now you retire and then you go off and do your spiritual practices. But I think that happens as a result of the intensity of life in New York. I also just think that even though New York has such frenetic energy in so many ways and such intense energy, I think that draws people with a certain intensity. And that intensity might take form as, I'm very ambitious to become a banker, or it might be like, I want to create this amazing like philosophy program. You know what I mean? I think that it's an intensity of energy that can manifest in many ways. I guess that's what do you think? I'm curious.
No, I actually agree with everything you're saying. Yeah, I think that I think I'd probably answer the question in a very similar way, and that it does seem to be kind of a form of necessity, and then also just, I think, going back to, I really like to read the Shaiva philosophy as sort of the philosophy of the artist in a certain kind of way, just like the kind of upsurge of creativity that is sort of like the Shakti of life, I feel like, is at the highest potency here. Like, or, it's not like everywhere else in the world sucks. Of course, that would be a New Yorker's response. Like, why would you want to be anywhere else? Really? This is, of course, the best. But yeah, I just think that there's this kind of overflowing vibrancy here that is absolutely inspiring. I often say it this way. It's like, if you can harness the energy of New York, it will take you to, the greatest kind of, the highest form of your own capacity for expression, success, whatever, however you want to think about it. But if you can't harness it, then it will mow you over, and you see it happen all the time, right? People who are able to harness it are able to ride the wave of that Shakti, and then people who just get completely, blown over by it. And I think there's no real medium. It's either one or the other,
Yeah, I mean, I know people, when I think of my graduate program, in fine arts, and I look at the people, there's some people who are complete art stars, like world famous major museum shows. There are like 3 of them I can think of from the 2 years I was there. So none from my year actually, one from the year before, and one from the year after, really, or 2 maybe, I don't know. But and then there are a bunch of people who sort of did what I did, like they make art, but they also found this other thing that they do that they're really into. And then a lot of people just vanished.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. I think just you can only take so much of being chewed up
Yeah.
by the New York art world. You had to find your center somehow. If everything in your life was dependent on someone's evaluation of your work or your day, just it's hard.
Yeah, and then I think that some of us are just masochists. We like the pain.
Yeah. Or we just keep throwing ourselves at it
Yeah,
again and
it's
again.
like,
and
maybe this time it'll be
eventually.
different. So I want to sort of, transition to talking a little bit about your sadhana and having you, talk about sort of some of the philosophy, because of course you're very articulate at speaking about these things. So you have we were just talking about before we started the interview that, you were a Shiva, Shiva, Shiva kind of person in terms of your practice. And then, more recently, maybe not so recently, but, at some point later, you developed this Kali sadhana. So what can you kind of trace that shift in your life? Was it the result of certain things that happened to you personally? Yeah, she's giving a nod of agreement. So tell us about that.
I mean, I always, from day one, knew that my spiritual home was the great temple of Nataraja in Chidambaram. I mean, that was without question. That was my spiritual home. And and I've been going there since 2008. I mean, I first went there with Douglas Brooks, and I've been there several times with him on pilgrimage and everything. And now I more often go on my own, so I can just really hang out there and be there, or I'll go with a couple friends, but I always spend time there on my own. And it's a very powerful place for me. And of course, at the far edge of town is its accompanying temple, which is Tilai Kali, which is one of the great Kali temples. And as you know, Chidambaram is huge. It's like a walled-in medieval village. I mean, it's 40-plus acres. And then Tilai Kali is like this tiny little place. But it's very powerful. And I always felt like I was trying to connect more with it. And I didn't. And I thought it was so strange. I'm like, I'm a feminist, and I'm like total girl's girl, and I have my girlfriends, and I support women, and why am I not connecting with the divine feminine and all of her ferocity? And I would just go back and be like, oh, Nataraja, and stand in front of him for, darshan for hours and be in bliss and, meander back to my hotel and realize I'd been up since 4 and it was only 9. It was time for breakfast,
Yeah.
So, it was a frustration to me. And then I just kind of let it go. I was like, okay, I don't know, for whatever reason, it's just, this is who I am. And it was like a joke with me and some of my friends, like, oh yeah, you're Shiva's girl. I was like, yeah, I kind of am. And then when I was diagnosed, about 4 years ago this month, actually.
Diagnosed with
DCIS, which is ductal carcinoma in situ, also known as stage 0 breast cancer. So, yeah, stage 0. Everyone's like, what's that? I'm like, oh. It's basically abnormal-looking cells that they think might go rogue. And I did active surveillance because my only other option was an immediate prophylactic double mastectomy. And I thought maybe I could hold it at bay, and I changed all my habits, and I did all kinds of stuff. Did not work out. But at that point, that was when I really went into this, like, what is going on? What's happening in my life? It was I had 4 very rough years, 3 years then culminating in a double mastectomy, months of chemo, months of radiation, from which I'm still recovering right now. So I would I started connecting more and more over this period of time. And then in 2018, I lost a year of my life because of treatment, so I'm trying to remember when things happened. It was January 2018. I was in Chidambaram for a couple of weeks, and 2 friends and I, who were there together, did a private Abhishekam at Tilai Kali. And even though I'd seen Abhishekam there before, Abhishekam, for those who don't know, is like the pouring over of liquids, but we did it privately. And you can't put it into words. It was so powerful. And she's covered in this mountain of red kumkum. It's a red powder. And so when they do Abhishekam, it pours off of her. and swirls. There's this mess of oil and swirling around your feet, and it's like you're standing in these thick, dense pools of blood. It just looks like blood. And something happens to you. And there are these monster cockroaches crawling all over because it's Kali, and it's crazy and messy and ecstatic and exquisite, and that was kind of it.
Mm.
And I still actually have the Rocky on my wrist from that. It amazingly hasn't fallen off, and I did not, despite my surgeries, did not let anyone take it off of me. So that was the real shift for me. It was when I just gave up looking that it was kind of like a joke. And she said, well, right, because I've been here the whole time. And yeah, like here I am. Yeah. So
thanks for seeing me. Finally.
Yes.
So tell us, I think many who are listening are not as kind of versed in the meaning of the deities. And so, oftentimes Kali is sort of understood in a very reduced way as sort of like this pissed off, bloodthirsty goddess. So can you unpack Kali for us and talk a little bit about her meaning and what she symbolizes?
Yeah. Kali, to sum her up, I tell people this: Kali is all possibility.
Mm.
Everything that can happen, has happened, did happen, will happen. That's terrifying.
Yeah.
Because she's every rasa, and the rasas are the flavors and the tastes of experience. So, and they range from like joy and eroticism and happy, lightness of heart, to the grotesque and the gruesome and, anger and all these things. So she's all of that. So the idea is, if you can imagine like her as an ocean, and each one of us just rises up like a little wave, dance around, we do our life, and then we like sink back down into her. So it's all possibility. It's everything that could be.
Mm. So in that sense, we are Kali, an expression of Kali.
We are Kali. There's no separation. And that was my realization. And no matter how many times people might have said that to me, it didn't matter. I had to feel it in my bones and in my blood and really experience that. And once you realize that, the ferocity is there because life is terrifying. You don't know what's going to happen. Unless you're in a straight karmic model, cause, effect, determinist model, which I am not, and most people are not actually entirely. Yeah. Or they want to be, but they're not really.
Yeah.
I mean, if you fear the unknown, you're not entirely in a determinist
Exactly. Model. That's so true.
Yeah. So all of possibility is scary. If you don't know what's going to happen, you have no real control over your life. You can do certain things. You can do what you can. We all do what we can. We create structures to live our lives. But not knowing what's going to come next is a lot. Mm-hmm. But it also gives us complete possibility, and that's the beauty of it. So you can look at the scary side of Kali with her fangs and her rolling eyes and her like tongue hanging out, and she's drinking the demon's blood in the Rakta Bija myth, but she can do that because it's her. Mm-hmm. It's like, she's just drawing that stuff back into herself. It's already there. All the scary stuff is there, but also all the beautiful stuff is there. Mm-hmm. So that was my big realization. I was kind of like, Kali. But I realized I felt the softness and the beauty and the love. It's like now that you're in the fire and your body's getting cut up and you're having toxic things pumped through your body and all these awful things are happening to you, can you just release into her? It's like, this is happening. Just get with it. It's not about resistance. It's about how do I keep finding alignment again and again and again. And I do feel like had I not had that experience in January, then I went through my surgery end of May, that got me through it. Mm. And it was this deep, deep, deep Kali sadhana. Yeah. Not that, and of course Kali is the most ferocious form of Shiva's beloved. So it's still in the Shiva Shakti tradition.
So this is so beautiful, and I'm hearing you say that a lot of the yoga of cancer, if we want to use a catchphrase, for you there's this feature of surrender. But are there any other features that of that process or that sadhana that you think are particular to the experience, like for someone that may have experienced cancer or is perhaps will experience cancer? Knock on wood. what are the kinds of things based on your experience you would offer to someone in that place?
A deep inner conversation. I think you have to talk to yourself or talk to like spirit, whatever you want to call it. I was calling it Kali, you have to have a deep conversation with your body, like a deep, deep conversation. And sometimes I would talk to it out loud, more often just silently, but I would be like, what is happening? What's that feeling? Where is that? It's okay. I love you. I did a real practice of I love you, just to my body, because, I went from having a body I loved to having,
Yeah.
like a pretty mangled looking chest, and, I had to love myself again. I had to do that, and it was very, very tough. And I kept saying, okay, but at least I'm alive. At least I can walk. I didn't lose my ability to walk and to move, but still, it's deeply traumatic to have something like that happen to you. And you don't feel the same, and your body's different forever, and it's rough. So that inner conversation is everything. You have to be so loving to yourself. You have to aggressively engage in self-love, even when you feel like you're faking it.
Yeah.
You have to, because you won't get through it intact otherwise. And I do believe that that's what gives rise to all the, I hate to say this, but all the pink ribbon stuff and all the, the fuck cancer and it empowers people to feel like they're warriors,
Yeah.
and I'm in the middle of writing about how that's not at all my point of view.
Well, that's actually what I wanted to ask you about, because when you were talking about loving your body, I wanted to ask the follow-up question. Does that involve also loving the cancer? Because you hear, and I know that sounds a little weird, but you hear a lot of people, it's always the attitude towards the tumor or whatever, however it's showing up in the body, is that it's the enemy that has to be sort of destroyed. And I just wonder if there's something a little bit wrong-headed about that approach, and actually that is sort of something that could feed, in a certain sense, I don't know, whatever it is, at least in terms of your own psychological kind of understanding of it, or health with regards to the whole matter. So what are your thoughts on that?
I have very strong thoughts on this. That's
Good.
a great question for me. I've actually written quite a bit about it on social media, and I'm writing an article right now for, we'll see what publication it comes out in, you'll see. But I have huge objections to the language of war applied to my body.
Yeah.
The first doctor I went to just to be diagnosed for this, they told me I had ductal carcinoma in situ, I went to a major surgeon at a hospital. I won't mention her by name because I never went back to her. And she said to me, she got right in my face and she said, I'll never forget it. She said, I know how you feel, like your body's been invaded.
Oh, God.
I mean, this is one of the top breast surgeons in this city, in New York City, at a major cancer center. And I was dumbfounded. I couldn't believe, and I was, and I said, you do not know how I feel. You don't know anything about me. I have not been invaded. Everyone has cancer cells in their body. I have a misalignment. And she looked at me like I was from Mars. Like she didn't know how to handle this. And I was just like, I'm
crazy
never going
yogi.
back there. Yeah. I mean, it was just, I know how you feel, like your body's been invaded. I can't even imagine someone in the medical profession saying, I know how you feel to a patient.
Yeah.
No,
you don't.
Communication 101. No one knows how anyone feels. How about, how do you feel right now?
Yeah, exactly.
Some people feel like this.
Mm-hmm.
Like just the sloppiness with language and the arrogance and the poisoning of my own mind toward my body.
Yeah.
Your body's been invaded. And it hadn't even occurred to me to feel that way.
Yeah.
I really felt like, there's something cellularly wrong. There's something wrong with the ecosystem of my body, that's misaligned, and I need to work on it and fix it. And it ended up I needed extreme measures to do that, but I never felt that way. I mean, even when I had expanders put in, this is like when you have a double mastectomy, they put in an expander so you can gradually, under the muscle wall, they pull it away from the rib cage so they can gradually expand. So they can put in silicone afterwards, so you can actually have fake breasts. How do I put this? Fake breasts.
Fake breasts.
So, which I now have.
That word is allowed.
Yes. But like, I didn't even think of those as invading. Like I consciously thanked these things for being in my body because they were helping me to move forward and give me something I wanted. They hurt for 6 months, it hurt a lot. But I don't see the point in viewing your body that way. And I know that for many people, they feel like they feel disempowered, so they need to fight. And they feel good when they're told they're warriors. And they're like, yeah, we're going to kick cancer's ass. And but it's so...
It's such a weird narrative
to me, because it's not the way the body works.
Yeah.
It's a complete ignorance of what's happening in the body. Like, everyone has cancer cells. Mine just went berserk,
Yeah.
So... how can you heal when you're hating part of your body?
Mm-hmm. Well, and also it seems like imagining that, putting it in terms of invasion, imagines a foreign entity entering you. And if it's doing that, then it sort of like exempts, it takes away the component of sort of empowering you to realize what kinds of choices and alignments could actually like reorient, what you're experiencing. But actually, my follow-up question to that, because as I think I've mentioned on the podcast before that I also had cancer last year and went through a process not nearly as brutal as yours, but still cancer.
Yeah,
and I think that same as you, I never considered invasion was just not something that's just not the way my mind thinks. But because we are sort of yogis, and we tend to sort of, perhaps to a problematic degree, take responsibility or assume responsibility for, like, the lack of health in our body. Like, is this related to, some kind of mental congestion? Is there an unresolved trauma? All those things that we as yogis consider, which is a great thing, but also can maybe come back and, bite us in the ass, for lack of a better expression. And I'm wondering if you had a similar experience as I did, because I definitely had that sort of, occasionally had that rabbit hole where I was like, what did I do wrong? Like, where did this come from? Is this my unresolved childhood trauma? Like, did this come from that? Like, could I have avoided this if I had followed an Ayurvedic diet? All of these sort of things, that I think is a very kind of yogic neurosis, you might say. So what did you have that? I mean, you sound like you had a very healthy approach to it, but... Oh,
I actually really appreciate you giving that a name, a yogic neurosis, because it was a really, and still continues to be, to worry me. Like, I love to eat, and I love good wine and everything, and everyone's like, oh, you shouldn't drink anymore ever. Like, another breast cancer yogi wrote to me, like, she's like, it's so awful, I just miss wine so much. And she's like, don't you? And I was like, well, no, because I'm drinking
it right now.
And I'm just sort of like, that's too, have I been like, oh, okay, so I'm not going to go out with a friend, like, and split a bottle on a regular basis, but, like, I will have a glass,
Yeah.
And because there are correlations between, yes, or two. There are correlations between breast cancer and alcohol consumption.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately, very unfortunately. But I don't, once you've already had breast cancer, does it matter? Like, I don't, you know what I mean? I don't.
Exactly, yeah.
Once you've had your breast removed, does it matter? I don't really know. And there's so many factors. And honestly, like, I grew up in a town that we found out later had terrible drinking water. It was a nice town next to old mill towns. And articles have come out recently in the past year about the fact that the water that I grew up drinking and bathing in was completely polluted. We didn't know. And so
there, yeah.
And it's a high cancer rate in the town.
Yeah.
So, and I tell my doctors this, and they're like, no. And I'm like, okay, fine. I mean, come on,
Yeah.
Come on. I was a little kid. I grew up there. I lived my whole life drinking the water there, until I moved out as an adult. So that's the likelihood. But yeah, I punished myself all the time. I'm like, oh, I should have been doing this. I should have been doing that. And, and I try to do like some intermittent fasting, and I try to do this. And for a while when I was trying to prevent it, I was doing like a 5-day limited calorie vegan fast once a month. And I eat everything. I'm an omnivore. But like, and I felt really healthy, but the cancer still, it was too much. Like, the situation with cancer in my body was just like ready to go.
Yeah.
And you can do everything right. And I know I friends who are like, oh, it's all about the gut. If you ate this, that, and the other thing. And I'm just like, oh, shut up.
There's just no hard and fast solution
no hard and
to
fast
every
solution.
Yeah.
Every body is different, and the circumstances, the environmental factors are all different. Like, traumas are different. Like, what we do with our sadness is different. What we do with our anger is different. And all these things we all know now. All of these things are factors.
Yeah.
I was in a really high stress environment. I was always high stress. I was super type A, got things done. That's why they love me at MoMA, and, how much did I drive myself into this crazy thing? How many of those like crazy late nights writing and working till 2 a.m. and making art, drove me into this.
Right.
Who knows?
But at the point is right, at the end of the day, we have to let that go because, obviously there are certain cancers where we can trace, the cause pretty clearly. Like, for example, lung cancer. That's it's fairly obvious, if someone smoked their whole life and they get lung cancer, that's what it's from. But with other cancers, with most other cancers, it's not that sort of like that deterministic kind of narrative of like what cause created this effect is you can't say. And if you get so bogged down by this sort of like self-responsibility process, that in and of itself is its own kind of hell realm.
It is a hell.
Yeah. So ultimately, it's
the Lila, right?
Right. So what is the yoga practice that releases that lets us?
I think mantra is always really key for me, and I have an extensive mudra practice, which is so funny when I say it because everyone's like, "Oh, really?" But that's a big part of my life. So mantra and mudra practice. Both very much, kind of tantric tradition stuff, and darshan. Going and standing at the foot of Nataraja and Tilai Kali and all the other many deities there, Ganesha, Murugan, all of them. Can
you talk about darshan a little bit? So is darshan seeing and being seen by the deity? Is it just that for you? Is there kind of an internal process going on? Do you have mantras that you're repeating in your, internally while you are in the context of darshan, or sometimes?
Yeah, sometimes. There's the the 15-syllable mantra that goes with Nataraja, which is, important, and I always say that, or kind of whisper it, or say it out loud, or think about it, or, and then, there's a lot of Om Namah Shivaya happening.
Oh yeah.
And I know and with Kali too, Kali mantras. Chanting is a pretty big part of my life, and a lot of that's private. I love going to kirtan and stuff. That's fun, but it's different. It's actually a different thing for me. Like, I love that kind of chanting, but really just chanting mula mantra, a root mantra of a deity, is really huge for me.
Yeah.
And I think when you start to combine all those things together, like mantra, mudra, darshan, like all these things at once, that's when some other thing happens. And you've stepped into some place inside yourself that is deep and bottomless and intimate. I don't know how to explain it.
You just did. You just did
good.
Perfectly. Yeah.
Okay.
So we talked before the interview about potentially having you tell the story of one of the myths, and I think we settled on one of the Kali myths. So do you want to, take us through that, tell us the story of that, and then, unpack its meaning from your perspective?
Yes, I love this story because it's so commonly told, and I had an issue with the way it was so neatly summed up at the end for so long. So I'm going to address that. So this is a great story. This is a wonderful story. It's the dance contest. I almost called it a dance party story. It's kind of a dance party. It's a dance contest story. That's our story. That's for afterwards. So it's a pretty famous story. It's easy to find different versions of it out there on the internet. What I like about it also is it explains the geographical situation in Chidambaram with Nataraja's temple and with Tilai Kali's temple. So Chidambaram is also referred to as the Tilai forest. It's the ancient site of Tilai, the ancient mangrove forest, essentially, and that's Nataraja's favorite place to dance. He dances like on the hilltop, in the clarity of the light. He dances on the cremation ground, where he dissolves life into death so that creation can begin again in the soma, in the moonlight, in the intoxication of life and death. And he also dances in the forest. And the forest is the place of mystery, because it's the place of shadows. It's not like the moonlight clarity of the cremation ground, and it's not the sunlight of the mountain. It's the place of shadows and ever-shifting light. So it's the place of indefiniteness. It's the place of artistry. And this is why when he dances there, he's Nataraja, the lord of the dance. So Shiva transforms into Nataraja. So, once upon a time, all the sages who lived in the forest and the denizens of the forest, of the Tilai forest, were extremely upset because Kali was spending all of her time in the forest. Kali, Shiva's most ferocious beloved, or the most ferocious form of Shiva's beloved, because his beloved takes many forms. And she, Kali is wild. She's half dressed. She has a skirt of human arms, and around her waist she's topless, and her breasts are hanging down, not attractively apparently. And she has these fangs, and her mouth is open, and her tongue is lolling out, which is considered very crude, and her hair is a mess, and she's, has a necklace of skulls. And there are all kinds of there are all reasons behind all this that I won't get into right now. But so she's very unkempt. She's very improper. Kali is all possibility, as we've said. So that means she can be crass and crude and behave in ways that no one is supposed to ever behave. So Kali is hanging out with all of her people. And her people are like, demons and these sort of unsavory sorts in the forest. And all the sages go to Shiva, and Shiva's like hanging out there meditation. He's not dancing right now. And they say, Shiva, you've got to do something. Like we're trying to do our rituals, we're trying to do our homas, like our fire ceremonies, we're trying to do puja, we're trying to do all these things, and we're interrupted, and they're like throwing things at us and creating noise, and they're being inappropriate. We can't sleep, nothing can be done. We can't even worship the gods properly because of her. So Shiva says, okay, well, what do you want me to do? They're like, well, take care of her. And he's okay. So Shiva goes to Kali, and Kali doesn't listen to reason. She's like, no, you can't make me leave. And, his beloved is in quite a mood. And so he challenges her to a dance contest. And the agreement is that whoever loses has to leave the forest, has to leave Tilai. So it begins. And the arrangement is that one of them does a dance, and then the other one, or a posture, and then the other one has to imitate it. And then that one has to do one back. And so they're going back and forth, challenging each other, matching each other, then upping it by one.
Amazing.
And so they're doing all these dances, and you can find these dances all over the temple, engraved in the stones, and it's amazing. And so they're going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and they're, of course, very evenly matched because, she is a form of Shakti, and he is Shiva, and Shiva and Shakti are really not separable. So he's kind of laughing, she's laughing, and then finally he decides he knows what he'll do to get to her. And so he does the Urdhva Tandava, which is one leg entirely up in the air and the other leg entirely down on the ground. And at this is the traditional way to end this story. And at this, she realizes she's lost the dance contest because she won't do something that unladylike. See the problem? See the problem? This is the way, if you Google this story, people, you will find that this is the way it ends. And this makes no sense to me. This makes no sense. And it's a polite way of summing up the story. It's like, ultimately, she was unladylike. Ultimately, she subjected herself to him. And for years, I had an issue with this and started suggesting different possibilities for an ending. Because, of course, the story gets told and handed down by the people in power, in charge of the story. And they're going to tell it the way they want to tell it. And we all know that every story, every myth, every one of these cultural narratives has, you can find 20 different versions if you Google it, online. So you can you can look through different books. Some of them are written in Tamil or Sanskrit, so I can't read them. But, there's so much out there. So I'm going to say two things. Here's the first one. it seems to me that Kali is liminal. You know, she's an edgy being. And that's her role. We can't not have Kali. You know, so there has to be that friction, that disharmony, that conflict between she and Shiva. Because you have to have that going on. Like she's terrifying, she's frightening, she's atrocious. Like, so what would happen? And you can't not have Shiva in the forest because he's everywhere. But Kali's everywhere too. So why does she get exiled? Like, it seems so pedestrian, so mundane, the ending.
Yeah.
She needs to preserve her liminality. And so she moves to the outskirts of the forest. And so when you're in Chidambaram, as you know, because you've been there, traditionally the last thing you do is you visit Tilai Kali on your way out of town as you're exiting. And it's a walk. It's about a 15-minute, at least, hike from the temple. I've done many times. And it's there for a reason. You have to have space between them as well. So now there's space between Shiva and this form of his Shakti. And you have to go all the way across town, and you have to make the trip in it. And it's a little bit arduous, and it's in this kind of wacky, you feel like you're in a town, and then all of a sudden you feel like you're in the middle of nowhere when you go to her temple. It's like on the edge of what? And she has to stay liminal. She preserves her liminal existence by not being Shiva Kama Sundari. Shiva Kama Sundari is the one Shiva desires. And she has the beautiful, also known as Parvati, really. She has the beautiful, two-armed, sweet, stunningly beautiful, calm, cool form. And she's in the temple next to Shiva.
Yeah.
So she's just another form of Kali.
Yeah.
So if Kali's to stay there with him, she has to be that. You know, because that's the relationship there. So she's like, no, I will not submit. I'm going to stay Kali. And I'm going to keep this conversation going. And I'm going to keep things rocky and complicated and whirling through the rasas. And so I'm going to stay out here. And then she stays very much in her own power, too. That's another thing. She has her own temple. It's her own power. She's calling the shots. What do you... if you look at Nataraja, to the left of Nataraja is the... it's an empty space. And we won't get into that too much because it's a whole other thing. It's darkness. It's a space. I won't get into it more than that. It's a whole other separate conversation. But so there is this absence on that side of him, and on the other side of him is his beloved sweet form of the goddess. When you go to Tilai Kali, there is an Akasha linga. There is just a place where it's a stand for a linga without the linga there. So they're both invisibly present in each other's temples.
That's beautiful.
And it's said also that she is also the space between all things in Shiva's temple. You just don't see her. You don't see Kali. You don't see her anywhere in his temple. Now here's I'd like to also offer one other interpretation of this, which is the one that Douglas Brooks talks about quite a bit, which is brilliant, which is that when he does the Urdhva Tandava, he's straight up and straight down. That just means like the upside down dance.
Yeah.
And so he looks like a Shiva Linga. And a Shiva Linga is the more traditional version of Shiva that you find all over the north, and you find it everywhere. And it's basically about oneness. Everything is Shiva.
Yeah.
And so when he does the Urdhva Tandava, he's saying everything is one, everything is Shiva. And she refuses him. She refuses that. And so the dynamic, she preserves the dynamic between Shiva and Shakti by refusing the singularity of the oneness.
Yes.
So a little heady, but
I love that.
It's beautiful, though,
it's
right?
Beautiful.
It's incredible. So.
That's incredible. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's beautiful. Yeah, yeah, you really are a great storyteller. So, we're getting close to the end of our conversation. This has been so lovely. I want to end by talking a little bit about pilgrimage, because of course we've been talking about Chidambaram and going there with teachers, without teachers, on your own for pilgrimage. And I just wanted to ask the question of what, obviously pilgrimage to a particular place requires a certain amount of resources. It requires a certain level of affluence. So I guess the question, of course, the first question is, what is pilgrimage from your perspective? And then the second question is, can we engage in pilgrimage as a practice, even if we can't visit these sites due to economic reasons or whatever.
It's interesting. I actually wrote an article for Yoga Journal on that a couple years ago about like if you're not able-bodied, if you don't have the financial wherewithal, what does it mean to go on pilgrimage within yourself? So actually, I do believe
Beautiful.
that that's a possibility. I don't think that everyone must go there or else.
Yeah.
I consider myself unbelievably lucky to be able to go there and definitely make a lot of sacrifices to make it there as often as I do. And I'm lucky to have friends there now, and so it makes it easier to go. But I do think that, I mean, the experience of pilgrimage for me is, I mean, ultimately it's an inner journey.
Mm-hmm.
So the outer journey should be triggering an inner journey. And so if it's not doing that, it's tourism, really.
Yeah.
And that might be nice to go see a new place, but it's not a pilgrimage. So I think that you can have that experience of pilgrimage within. I mean, you could set yourself up in a situation where you're like, this is my sadhana this week, and I'm doing this, and I'm doing this, and I'm doing this. I'm doing this meditation, I'm doing this set of mantras, I'm doing this. And you'll have an inner experience akin to pilgrimage if you do that. I mean, some of the people I know who have the deepest spiritual practices, in the Indian tradition have never been to India. So it's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I found that, I feel really grateful that, it's easy to say this now, but I didn't go to India until the first time until 2 years ago. And then I went again last year. I'm going again this year, thankfully. And, I had developed sort of such a relationship with, obviously, Indian philosophy, yoga philosophy, quite deeply before I ever went there. And so when I went there, the whole environment was just so saturated with meaning. And I've never had this experience before where I really felt the juxtaposition between my experience being on pilgrimage and recognizing that I am on pilgrimage by being able to see the difference in the relationship with the environment by people who were just there on tourism, because of course India is a huge draw, especially for Europeans and other people. Not Americans don't tend to go there as much unless they're going, because they have yoga connection. But it's a very popular place to visit. But people there, met so many people who have no understanding of any of the kind of symbolism, and if they are going into a temple, they're going with that sort of abstracted, in a kind of abstracted way, and sort of with some kind of clear separation, and seeing this as sort of just an alien environment that they don't really understand. And I felt so grateful for the ability to be there with that lens, and it really put into perspective, and I don't think it's possible just anywhere, just in India. But it put into perspective just the possibility of engaging with every place with this imbued resonance, right? And even in our own homes and in New York City, that there is this choice to step into the kind of pilgrimage point of view, or to default back to sort of the habitual whatever. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I thought I'd brain dump.
I liked it. No, I agree with everything you say. It was, for me, it was so meaningful the first time I went. And I felt when I entered Chidambaram, I was in tears, and I felt like I had come home and I'd never not been there. It was so familiar to me. And so I felt very fortunate. And did you have that experience too? Or?
It grew. It sort of grew over, I think, because I was with a group, and so there was, it was a perfect group to be with because it's the group of people that I study under Paul with. But I think the first time I went to India, I traveled by myself, and I was also there on my birthday, and I sort of gave my birthday. I had this very sort of conscious moment where I was giving my birthday to Shakti. I was essentially saying, it's your birthday. And I went to a Shakti Peeth, and the form of Parvati there was wearing a birthday hat. Isn't that just wild? And I was just see these little synchronistic experiences that I had that really I also had a dream where I married Shiva. I was having these really auspicious dreams. I had a dream where I had several dreams where I woke up laughing. And if my history of dreaming, I usually have nightmares. So waking up in pure joy was so auspicious for me. And I think I could only really have that if because my imagination, being by myself, I was allowed to let my imagination run free, and sort of the creative possibility that took in terms of my own relationship to India. And so I think going back now, because I'm going to Chidambaram again, I'm gonna reserve more time for my own personal, like, what, because we have lots of free time once we get there. We can walk to the temple by ourselves and explore and all of that. And I find that I have more, I feel more of an intimacy when I can just kind of let my own exploration happen with no kind of, guidelines or any kind of, people leading us around to see certain things, or the feeling of needing to stay with a group, which has always put sort of limitations on what you can feel and experience, I think. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be going back, I don't think, if a seed hadn't been planted.
Yeah. It's interesting. It was strange how familiar it was to me. I was like, oh, yeah, I belong here. And that was that.
Yeah.
I was in. And I had always wanted to go to India for different reasons throughout my life, just aesthetically. I was fascinated by the arts and everything. So this was a whole next level of it. But I wish we were crossing paths this year. I wish we were going to be there.
I know. When
time.
will you be there?
Probably mid-January.
Oh, yeah.
And then I go do a lead retreat in Goa, and then I'm going to come back.
Beautiful.
Probably with a couple students.
Amazing. Yeah, I'll be there like when it's super hot in March.
Yeah.
So, but we'll have to arrange some time when we're there together.
Someday.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, Susanna, this has been a really wonderful conversation. Is there anything based on what we've talked about? We've talked about art, we've talked about your Kali sadhana, we've talked about myth, we've talked about pilgrimage. We've talked about the yoga of cancer, so many really rich topics. Is there anything that you feel like you'd like to share about any of those things that we didn't touch upon, or maybe you have a sort of something insightful you want to end on?
Oh, boy.
No pressure.
The pressure's on.
No pressure. Be wise. Just
Be
leave
wise.
us a nugget of wisdom. No.
I think one thing about Kali is you want her with you.
Mm.
And that's one thing people are like, I'm scared of her. I was like, oh, I was too, until you realized she's you.
Yeah.
You're in the fabric of her being. She's in the fabric of your being. There's no separation, really. So I think that you want to really think about who you want to walk with. I mean, just walk through life with, walk through your heart with, walk through your body with, and not just the people you surround yourselves with. That's certainly part of it. As we know, everyone in the yoga world knows things shift who you hang out with when you get serious about your practice. But sort of inwardly, who do you want to be walking with?
Mm.
And she is really the ferociously loving divine mother. And when you're deep, deep, deep in some difficult place, you want her holding you.
Yeah.
And so if you just release a little, she's there.
Mm.
And she puts her hand in yours, all of her scary skulls and everything, and you walk through the fire and the darkness and the forest.
That's beautiful. So I actually do have a follow-up question to that, which is, so that quality of being held, sort of, you're kind of invoking a slightly maternal quality to Kali in this way. Then what is the qualitative difference of like walking with Shiva in your experience? Like, is there, are there times in your life, is it essentially, because we know they are non-separate, that there's a sense in which both are present, or is there kind of a relationship between the circumstances of your life and whether or not you would invoke that walking with Kali or walking with maybe a form, an expression of Shiva?
Whoever arrives. I mean, he's, Nataraja, Shiva Nataraja is always dancing in my heart. It's, that's being with Kali is being with Shiva. So
yeah.
It's, I'm never without him. Mm-hmm. It's just sort of, he's like looking on saying, yep, creation, maintenance, dissolution, concealment, revelation. And Kali's like, I'm going to hold your hand right now. They're both there.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So Susanna, can you tell us a little bit about what's happening coming up? Are you doing any workshops, retreats that you want to share with the audience?
Oh, I'd love to. Yes, thank you for asking. I always forget to mention those things. I'm like,
Well,
I fall deeply in love talking about Kali and Shiva, and I'm just like, yeah, it's great.
Don't worry. I always remember.
Remember. Actually, yes, on October 7th, my course begins 30 Things About the Goddess.
Amazing.
And that is it's actually over 30 Hindu and Vedic goddesses, and each one is thoroughly outlined. A lot of information, very digestible, very easy to read, but very thorough and academically sound, so you can rely on it. And with lots of images and then suggested practices. The so what is always there. I never teach without a so what.
Brilliant.
It's like, yay, Lakshmi, hooray, but
and so what?
Yeah. Gayatri. I'm like, what is the Gayatri as opposed to Gayatri as opposed to a Gayatri? It's 3 things. I outline all that.
I love that.
So, and I, the reason it ended up being more than 30 is because I did one that's like 5 key Vedic goddesses, and that's one of the 30. So it's a great course. I've only taught it once before, and it was very popular, and it's kind of like if you just want like a huge survey on Hindu goddesses, it's the only thing out there that'll really do that.
Yes, that's incredible.
And I also have a retreat in Goa. There are only like 3 spaces left, but that I'm co-leading with my favorite teaching partner, my friend Todd Tesson out of Detroit. And we've taught in Europe together, and we've taught in India together before, and that's end of January into February.
Excellent. So, and we can find information on your website.
It's all on my website.
Which is SusannaHarwoodRubin.com.
So if you can spell it, you can find me.
I know. Well, I mean, if you Google Susanna Harwood Rubin, even if you spell it wrong, your name will pop up. Yeah. And Susanna also has this book, Yoga 365, which actually I gave to my mother for Mother's Day or her birthday. I can't really remember which, way before I even knew Susanna was a person. I mean, at least I knew she was a person, obviously. I didn't know her. I didn't know that we taught at the same yoga studio here in New York. And so it's one of these beautiful serendipitous things where I happen to have been connected to you even before we were connected. I love it.
And so it's the ultimate compliment. Thank you.
It's beautiful. Yeah. It's a really beautiful book, and it's a wonderful day by day. It's sort of one of those texts where each day has a different focus, and we've all seen those, throughout our lives, but get this one because it's got the most kind of rich and insightful sort of, things to kind of consider or contemplate over on a day by day basis. So check it out, Yoga 365.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Jacob. It's been great. I just want to sit here and talk to you for like 5 more hours. So.
Oh, you'll definitely be back. We'll have another episode with you for sure.